Please have a seat. Thank you. Forgive my tardiness. Traffic was terrible. I'm totally making that up. The subcommittee will come to order. Good morning. Today we are here to take a closer look at whether the Veterans Benefits Administration is responsible for steward of the more than $100 billion taxpayer dollars that Congress provides every year. In short, that means paying each veteran the correct amount of benefits they have earned. When VBA makes underpayments, veterans' budgets get stretched. And when VBA makes overpayments, taxpayer dollars are wasted and veterans and their families get put into difficult positions of owing debts to the VA simply because VBA makes a mistake. Year after year, VBA leaders have failed to clean up their policies, which they are most certainly working on, procedures and element improper payments in the pension programs. Over the last year, the pension program issued over $1.3 billion in improper payments. That's an error rate of over 10%. Over $860 million were overpaid within VBA's control, usually because they failed to properly use some of the data or information that they have access to. Much of the overpayments were due to the VBA's failing to do their due diligence and veterans benefits income information from the Social Security Administration. That income information was inaccurate for over a decade. When VBA stopped relying on the Social Security income data, they started depending on only veterans to self-report any changes in their income. This was a massive error. Many of the veterans did not understand that they had to report or they were unable to do so. We appreciate that several senior VA leaders have stated that the veterans will not be forced to repay the pension overpayments, but this never happened. This should have never happened in the first place. If VBA has already implemented a reasonable, effective policy at any point during the last decade, the improper payments would have been reduced before they even go out. The improper payment situation in the disability compensation program is not very encouraging either. VA has declared victory here, but the underlying data is a bit murky. In 2021, someone at the VA determined the improper payments had fallen below the reporting threshold, so they permanently stopped reporting. They also stopped sampling and testing the payment data. I understand they are still doing risk audits, but that seems to involve reviewing policies and procedures, not crunching the payments that are necessary. Meanwhile, we are consistently encountering examples of incorrect compensation payments. Just 2 weeks ago, surviving spouses testified at the full committee hearing that VBA's long delays in discontinuing dependencies and indemnity compensation payments are creating overpayments debt that surviving spouses have to repay. In September, we had a subcommittee hearing where we examined VBA's failure to process over 81,000 veterans' requests to add or remove dependents. We still don't know exactly how many overpayments or underpayments that were created. Again, I appreciate the assurance we have heard from the VA that it won't claw back these debts from the veterans that were caused by the VBA's mistakes. But this is just another example of how accounting problems cause serious problems. I've looked forward to hearing from our witnesses about a strategy to resolve the pension improper payments and a better explanation about the disability compensation improper payments thus far. Transparency is crucial so veterans can have confidence in VA and the taxpayers can trust that their money is being well spent on those that have earned it. Today we are going to be hearing from VA and the Office of Inspector General. I want to thank everybody for coming. I yield to the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly the issue of improper payments, whether they be overpayments, underpayments, or a result of waste, fraud, abuse, or simple human error, is a concern that I share with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We all want to ensure that VA is good stewards of taxpayer money, that programs are efficiently and effectively run, and that benefits are accruing to those we intend. However, we must always remember that the programs designed by Congress and implemented by the executive branch are by, for, and about human beings and are subject to all the flaws and frailties that humans have. Humans make mistakes despite their best intentions, and so I think we must focus our attention on ensuring that programs have strong internal controls and that everything is being done to get it as right as possible. So I appreciate you, Chairman Luttrell, for holding this hearing to examine improper payments at the Veterans Benefits Administration. I will express some concern over the unnecessarily provocative title of this hearing, as it presupposes malfeasance without the subcommittee having received evidence of such. So I look forward to hearing testimony from VBA and VA's Office of Inspector General today and learning about the extent to which they are doing all they can to hold themselves accountable and guard program integrity. We must remember that the mistakes of human nature don't equal malice, and they certainly don't present evidence of illegal activity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Our witnesses from VA today, Mr. Ronald Burke, the Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight in the Veterans Benefit Administration. Mr. Burke is joined by Ms. Lashiko Graham, Chief Financial Officer for the Veterans Benefit Administration. Mr. Brent Aranti, the Deputy Assistant Inspector General for Audits and Evaluations, will testify on behalf of VA's Office of Inspector General. Mr. Aranti is joined by Ms. Dana Sullivan, Director of Claims and Appeals for OIG's Office of Audits and Evaluations. I'd like to swear in the panel, so please stand. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? Thank you, and let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Burke. You're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and other members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting us here today to discuss VA's financial management policies and practices. Joining me today is Lashiko Graham, the Chief Financial Officer for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Mr. Chairman, at VA, we believe that veterans, their families, and survivors have served and sacrificed for our country. We take our mission to serve veterans very seriously. We also take our responsibility as stewards of taxpayer dollars equally as seriously, and want to assure Congress that VA is not illegally spending taxpayer dollars. VA works diligently to safeguard veterans and beneficiaries' financial well-being by using a range of strategies to proactively address and mitigate potential improper payment issues as quickly as possible. Improper payments, such as overpayments, occur in less than 7% of award actions processed by VA. For example, in fiscal year 2023, VA processed over 4.2 million award actions, of which improper payments occurred in 6.87% of those actions. We are committed to reporting improper payments to Congress and have made significant improvements to identify and prevent such payments. VBA began reporting improper payments to Congress in 2004 as required by the Improper Payment Information Act of 2002. Since then, there have been a series of laws that aim to identify, prevent, and recover improper payments in federal spending. The current law is the PIIA of 2019, signed into law March 2nd, 2020. PIIA and OMB require programs determined to be at significant risk of improper payments, either improper payment rates of both 1.5% of program outlays and $10 million, or $100 million, to produce statistically valid estimates of improper payments through sample testing. Since 2004, VBA has made every effort to identify and report improper payments in alignment with legislation and implementation guidance provided by OMB. Currently, VBA pension is the only program still required to report improper payments. All other programs were removed from testing requirements with concurrence from the Office of Inspector General. VBA's disability compensation program demonstrated commitment to improve payment integrity through the implementation of effective corrective actions. On April 2nd, 2021, the program was removed from the testing and reporting requirements of PIIA. However, VBA's disability compensation program is still required to perform annual risk assessments and recapture and recover activities. VA has documented processes for collections, pre- and post-payment reviews to identify and recover overpayments as required by OMB. VA also includes using quarterly payment reviews to identify possible duplicates and overpayments. Additionally, VA proactively reviews potential situations for improper payments through various data matching agreements with several federal agencies. These data matching agreements allow VA to receive information on a regular basis to determine a beneficiary's original and continued entitlement to VA benefits. This assists in identifying improper payments to beneficiaries with the intent to reduce potential overpayments that would otherwise be discovered based on information reported by the beneficiary or their fiduciary. VA currently has interagency data sharing programs with the Social Security Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the Defense Manpower Data Center, and the Department of Defense. In addition to our commitment to reporting issues to Congress under the law, VA also ensures transparency for issues concerning improper payments discovered by VA. As an example, in 2011, VA discovered a data quality issue with the results of the Social Security income match, which is a computer matching agreement with SSA used to validate SSA income for pension recipients. From 2011 through 2017, VA continuously collaborated with SSA to resolve this issue. On March 13th of 2021, VA and Social Security reestablished the SSA income match, resulting in the creation of large beneficiary debts going back several years. Recognizing the hardship and distress that these debts may have caused, on November 2nd, 2023, VA paused the collection of all established debts and the establishment of new debts. VA will not collect debts associated with the data quality issue and will refund any payments made on these debts. As of February 1st, 2024, VA has determined that approximately 12,369 beneficiaries have been affected due to the SSA match data quality issue. This population is still being assessed for a total overpayment amount. VA remains committed to ensuring that claimants affected by VA delays in processing overpayments due to the quality data issue with the SSA matching program are not negatively impacted. It is important to note that anytime VA is required to establish a debt, such as when VA proposes to reduce or terminate a benefit based on information or evidence from a third party received by VA, all beneficiaries are afforded due process rights under the Constitution. This means that before we take any adverse action, VA provides a statement of our proposed decision, including all of the details, in order for the beneficiary to have ample understanding of VA's proposed decision, and then provides the beneficiary 60 days to respond. In addition to due process rights, the beneficiary is also afforded their right to present evidence, request a personal hearing, and to have representation. This helps beneficiaries by explaining the basis for a proposed adverse action and provides ample time to submit evidence showing why the action should not be taken. However, any time a debt does need to be established based on evidence and after due process is afforded, beneficiaries will have all existing debt relief opportunities, including requesting extended payments, requesting a waiver, or disputing the debt. Debt relief is available through VA's Debt Management Center for all benefit debts to include a waiver, suspension, compromise, or payment plan. All debtors may be eligible for VA's financial relief options mentioned above, in addition to filing a dispute or an appeal. Across VA, we are committed to providing the high-quality care our veterans have earned and deserve. We continue to improve services to meet the needs of our veterans and their families. We are grateful for the resources that Congress has provided to VA and pledge to do all that we can to ensure they are used as effectively as possible. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. My colleague and I are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The written statement of Mr. Burke will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Arante, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Office of Inspector General's oversight of the Veteran Benefits Administration's compensation and pension programs. These programs provide critical support to veterans, their survivors, caregivers, and family members. As you noted, I am accompanied by Ms. Dana Sullivan, who has led many of our reviews of VBA programs. The OIG focuses on illegal and improper payments of all kinds, whether it is criminal fraudulent investigations, audits that examine underpayments and overpayments, and reviews of potential waste. Our independent oversight teams are dedicated to making meaningful findings and recommendations that advance VBA's efforts to provide prompt and accurate benefits and services to eligible recipients while making efficient use of its funds. We know that many veterans and other beneficiaries rely on their monthly benefit payments and that their well-being is at risk when significant claims processing errors are made. Our oversight work helps VBA identify deficiencies in their processes, systems, and internal controls that can lead to corrective action and make its leaders and personnel better stewards of taxpayer dollars. Despite the dedicated work of VBA personnel, the OIG's body of work on VA's compensation and pension programs has found that improper payments are often caused by ineffective internal controls, inadequate technology, or human error resulting from complicated and unclear policies and guidance. In my written statement, I describe how VBA struggles with designing, implementing, and monitoring its technological infrastructure and processes. We see areas that require continuous improvement, such as strengthening an individual's email address who was responsible for determining if benefit payments should continue or if they should be suspended based on fleeing from a felony. This created a single point of failure when that individual was out of the office and missed the email. This type of incident is mitigated with stronger VBA internal controls. In another report, we found VBA continued to send payments to veterans for up to 7 months after their deaths. VBA staff did not realize this error in processing until the OIG identified the mistake during our review of the Social Security death match process. VBA officials did not provide sufficient monitoring at that time to prevent or identify these types of errors. The OIG is committed to providing effective and independent oversight of claims processing activities and VBA operations. Further, we have developed training for all VA staff on how to engage with the OIG. This training details for VBA and other personnel how and when to report suspected wrongdoing, including waste and illegal payments. Additionally, we now send routine fraud alerts to all VA staff and other stakeholders, alerting them to high-risk processes and indicators of fraudulent activity. Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement. We would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The written statement of Mr. Rante will be entered into the hearing record. We will now move to questioning. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Burke, Ms. Graham, the ranking member and myself, the ranking member, myself, and Mr. Self expected a response on a letter that we sent you about improper payments on Monday. We haven't received it. Do you have that letter on you right now?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir, I do not.
So now I'm compelled to ask you why you would come to our committee in front of us and the ranking member and myself and not have the answers to the questions that we're requesting. Can you look me square in the face and tell me why that's happening? Because what I want you to understand is that he and I are taking this very seriously. The whole committee is, all right? And we just don't sit down and write these letters to send out just so you don't respond to it. Now, I'm going to wire brush you a little bit, okay? Because you knew you were coming here. Whether or not you expected me to ask you about this, or is it Ms. Graham, either one of you, I got both your names in front of me. Which one of you, is it you, sir?
It's me, sir.
Okay. Now, I would request that you have that to me before you walk out of here, which I don't think you're going to be able to do. But if you can have that to me by the end of the week, I would appreciate that. Mr. Rante, how many of these reports, how long have you been in this position?
I have been in this position since 2015, and I have been with the OIG since 2008.
Okay, so are these reports that you're giving us today, are there similarities from last year, the year before, the last 5 years, and the last 10 years to these particular issues of overpayment?
Yes, sir. Every time that we look at an area that involves claims processing, without failure, we find underpayments and overpayments.
How much money did we overpay? And the fugitive thing's got me kind of spun up a little bit. That's a bit ridiculous, especially if it's just landing on a single point of failure. How much money did we in the VA spend that was overpayment, waste, fraud, or abuse? What was the dollar amount? Mr. Burke, Ms. Graham?
Sir, with regarding compensation and pension for FY23, we established $2.1 billion in debt for veterans.
Last year?
Last year.
2.1 billion.
Yes, sir.
Overpayment?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that seems like an obscene amount of money, considering how much money that we could use that money in different areas, whether it's our spouses, it's mental health, the list goes on and on. What was the year previous to that?
In FY22, it was $1.3 billion.
So we're going the wrong way by $1 billion. Am I correct on that?
That is correct in terms of the numbers. We also collected funding from the veterans for the debts that have been reported as well. For FY22, we collected over $837 million. And in
What do you mean, I'm sorry, you lost me on that. What do you mean collected? You went and took the money back from them?
For debts that had been established, that were properly established.
So we've overspent by 2.1 billion?
In FY23,
In 23, and how much did we collect back?
we collected $1.1 billion.
Okay. I'm sure our veterans were not happy about that. My point is, if Mr. Arante has over the past, you said 2007, I'm sorry, how long you been there?
2008.
2008 has been feeding the same discrepancies to the office over and over again, and the numbers are getting worse. I'm going to look to leadership and ask, why is this problem continuing to exist if you have the answers and how to solve it? Mr. Burke.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That's a very fair question. Let me just take a second to frame up that we are serving more veterans, more decisions year over year than ever before.
Mr. Burke, you can park that one, okay? We just got out of, it's just where you live. Your job's not easy, okay? And you can't give me the because we got more veterans coming. Guess what? They're going to continue to do so, okay? So I can't go home and blame the veterans for being veterans.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to stand by my comment because it's relevant to the question that you asked. We are, as we do 4.2 million award actions, it does increase the amount of opportunity for either human error and the like. What I do want to point out is, yes, we do appreciate the oversight from the Office of Inspector General. We have learned from those trends. We have closed out many of the recommendations. We've implemented strategies, SOPs, tools and technologies. But I will say we've got the most dedicated and talented workforce in the federal government, and we do stand behind the record 4.2 million award actions in FY23. We are committed to reducing improper payments. We take this very seriously, and we have work to do.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate all the effort toward the veterans, but if you went from 1.8 billion to 2. I'm fudging these numbers a little bit, but an increase of $1 billion, we're not hitting the nail on the head here. My time's up. I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to make sure we're not ignoring the experience of the veterans, which is really important in this equation. I've heard directly from constituents that have received improper payments, then unexpectedly get these debt collection letters. It can be a significant source of fear, of anxiety for the beneficiary, and it can also hurt their credit scores, potentially. So I want to know how VBA is minimizing the impact on beneficiaries who either establish those debts or, how do they work to forgive those debts, especially when the veteran has done nothing wrong. They provided everything they need to, and through no fault of their own, they receive one of these debt collection letters. So what recourse do they have? What support can you give them?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. We are very sympathetic to the customer experience. In this case, our customer are veterans and beneficiaries, obviously. And so it's important to note that not only by the Constitution do we serve appropriate due process rights, but in our proposed decision letter, we are letting veterans and their representatives know the rationale behind any proposed adjustment. We've worked to soften the letter content to make it a little bit more veteran-friendly, beneficiary-friendly. We do serve the due process period, and currently we are taking full advantage of the provisions in the Cleveland-Dole passage that allow us to waive debts that are not the responsibility of the beneficiary.
Okay, and how do you communicate that? Is it just through the letter with the softened language to the veteran? I know there are new authorities that came about from legislation that we pushed in the last Congress. And so can you talk a little bit more about how you're using those authorities and how you communicate that to veterans?
Yes, sir. So typically in our average day-to-day routine, it would be a proposed action with the contents explaining the rationale. There would be a due process letter that affords the rights for a hearing, to submit new evidence, to have us reconsider, all of that before an actual decision to create a debt. When a debt is actually created, then the Debt Management Center provides debt relief options, again, through correspondence. We are in the midst of finalizing our procedures that will allow us to implement the provisions of Cleveland Dole, and we're very appreciative of the law that provides us avenues to provide some of that debt relief. So when we do that, we will also be communicating to veterans, beneficiaries, the impact of any created debt, what part is their responsibility, what part may be collected. And in fact, in some of the pension overpayments, we are refunding amounts that have already been collected.
So, Mr. Burke, I'd like to turn to the internal governance controls that OIG monitors. And one of the common threads in their reporting is lack of sufficient program supervision. It seems to flow from a decision on resource allocation. So what's VBA been doing to ensure that supervisors are not stretched too thin and have the capacity to oversee programs at a level of granularity necessary to catch problems before they metastasize?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I want to start my response by emphasizing that quality, accuracy of decision-making, and focus on improper payments is the responsibility of all VBA employees, all VA employees. And so with respect to your question about supervisors, we've done quite a few things, whether it be the advancement of dashboards, tools, and technologies to allow them to see the workload at their level better, a constant review of employee performance standards. We're constantly looking at the employee to supervisor ratios to make sure that we're not overburdening supervisors. We're also looking at the ratio of quality review team personnel to ensure that we have an ample number of folks reviewing the quality of work. And we're also making sure that the responsibility doesn't solely fall on first-line supervisors in our regional offices. There are program offices, there are tools and technologies that need to be done at the central office level to assist that supervisory burden as well, and we're committed to continuing that approach.
I'm wondering in my remaining time if you can comment on production goals and quotas for frontline employees and their ability to be able to maintain decision-making. There's a lot of throughput happening. We're continuing to ask VBA employees to do more and more in terms of assisting our veterans. How it seems like you can realize more erroneous payments as a result of that. Can you comment on how that plays out with respect to some of the production goals?
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'm proud to say I'm here representing the best workforce in the federal government. Our employees in the field and central office are doing a fantastic job. Room for improvement across the board. With respect to our focus on production, I do want to let the committee know that in our employee performance standards, a critical element of performance is not only production, but also high quality. And we continue to focus. We formed a VA central office quality huddle. We had field advisory committees to kind of help be that canary in the coal mine. And I can assure Congress that our focus is not just productivity, it's producing accurate results as well.
Well, thank you. I'm over my time. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Mr. Self, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with the fugitive felon referrals. I think I understood that it was human error or process error that you did not process 2,000 of those. Is that correct? Which would you characterize it as? Process or human?
It was human error.
Human error.
Right.
Okay. It concerns me that you are not processing felon referrals, 2,000 at least, 4,000 that I think it said the OIG were actually identified. However, VA is processing into the NICS database veterans who simply need a fiduciary, which I believe, and I think many on this committee believe, is not protecting the constitutional rights of our veterans, because there is no judicial review, there is no judicial determination that they lose their freedom to own guns, arms. And VA, I know you say you don't do it, but you do put them in the NICS database. I think we have a discontinuity here between policy, because you are paying money to thousands of felons who should not be paid, and yet law-abiding veterans are getting put on the NICS database, and I ask you to go back, because it's all under VBA, and readdress that. Now, It looks to me like in the documents that we got, there are like 13 different programs at least that have errors in this. So how many employees have been disciplined for these human errors out of these 13, at least I count 13 different programs? And what is your discipline when you identify these improper payments?
Well, let me first address the question of what we do. Not every error is malicious and worthy of discipline. Of course. It helps us identify training needs. It helps us improve our overall training programs.
That's a sanction. Go into training.
And what I would say is that we've gotten better with the tools, the tracking, the technology, the sharing of trends, the looking down at the individual regional office levels to find out what trends they see in their day-to-day, because what happens in one office may not happen in another. I don't have for you, sir, an answer to the number of employees that were subject to progressive discipline for the improper payment, but I will assure you that it is something that we are focusing on, that we take seriously. And in fact, out of all of our program delivery, benefits delivery, only one is still required to report under the OMB. We were under the reporting requirements in 2021. Unfortunately, in 2022 and 23, it increased. In 2022, the improper payment rate went about 11.5%. It's gone down to about 10.5%, and we are optimistic that we'll get pension in line as well, but unfortunately, we did see a pickup there. But we are addressing it, sir.
Okay, very good. And I want to go back to the letter that the chairman mentioned. Did you know about this letter? Because it wasn't addressed to you personally. Did you know about this letter? Because in our testimony this morning, we found out that congressional letters may or may not be read in order to be acted on. Did you know about this letter? And again, you were not the primary addressee.
Yes, sir, I did know about the letter.
Okay, thank you. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Self. Mr. Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This seems like quite the problem when we have a national debt like we do, $34 trillion, $200 billion deficit every single month. What's the problem? I'm going to start with you, Mr. Arante. In your opinion, what's the problem?
Yes, sir. I think the fundamental problem is VBA does not prioritize the development and the following of internal controls. I don't think it's the first thing that comes to their mind when they develop a program or a process or a technology. Strong internal controls mitigate what Mr. Self was indicating, the human error. That is one purpose of the internal control.
Why not? Why not, Mr. Arante? Why do you think they don't?
Because I think they based on our work, I see they put a lot of emphasis on processing claims, and I understand that commitment. They have to make a business decision, right? That they're trying to get claims out and get benefits to veterans as fast as they can. I think that there's tension there between speed and quality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's tension between speed and internal controls. And sometimes I don't think they test processes to break them to find out where they need to have internal controls. Instead, I think they implement a process or they implement a program, and then as things break down the road, they fix it. That's where I think.
You said you've been doing this for a long time, and this has been a long-standing problem. Is that correct?
Yes.
So clearly this problem is getting worse. Have you ever seen anybody in the VA held accountable?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Can you give us some examples of that?
So, sure. Actually, this was Ms. Sullivan and I. A couple years ago, we received a tip from senior VBA leadership that they were looking at one of their internal reports, and they felt that there was fraud, ongoing fraud, at one of the regional offices. So myself and one of Ms. Sullivan's staff, we went down there and we investigated, and not only did we find one staff committing fraud, we found two. And those folks we referred those to our criminal investigators. They followed their process. They determined there was fraud. They took it to the U.S. attorney, and both of those gentlemen were released from work.
Okay, but those are probably pretty small examples of fraud. We're not talking to the tune of, $2.1 billion overpayments in fiscal year '23. I'm talking about at the high level. Like, you got Mr. Burke in here, Miss Graham in here. Have you ever seen anybody at high levels of Veterans Affairs held accountable for this unbelievable amount of waste and abuse with the American taxpayer money?
I'm not familiar with any instance, sir.
Yeah, and that's why you continue to see this happen over and over again, which is why, so many people don't want to see as few things put under the control of the federal government as possible, because it's inherently known for having such high rates of fraud, waste, and abuse, and nobody ever gets held accountable, right?
Not at the senior level like you were implying, sir. I have not seen that.
Yeah. Ms. Graham, do you accept any of the responsibility for this unbelievable amount of waste and abuse?
Sure. In the time that I have been in this position as the Chief Financial Officer, it is incredibly important that we get this right and that we do all that we can
Not what I asked you.
to mitigate.
Do you take any accountability or any responsibility, yes or no? And if you don't, you don't. Just let me know. Do you yes or no?
Yes, I take full responsibility because I am the Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, so when we're talking sums of money like that, when we're talking $1.3 billion in fiscal year '22 and now $2.1 billion overpayments in fiscal year '23, why are you still in that role, ma'am? If you're taking responsibility and ownership, why are you still in that role?
Sir, I was just put in this role
Okay.
like 30 days ago.
Well, that makes sense.
So, exactly.
Okay.
So, but nonetheless, I am in the role and I take responsibility for being in this role. There's a lot that we are trying to do going forward to try to mitigate any type of overpayment for veterans in general. There's a lot that we're doing to try to ensure that they receive due process and that we correct it and we use all of the statutory obligations governed to us about how we process that to eliminate that and mitigate that to the best of our abilities.
Well, ma'am, you definitely have your work cut out for you, and I apologize for not knowing that you just took the job 30 days ago. But I hope you can straighten this out, because at the end of the day, this money doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the American taxpayer. And this happens all day, every day up here, and nobody ever gets held accountable. And it's why we continue to see this fraud, waste, and abuse continue to be out of control. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Ms. Graham, I do not envy the rucksack that you're going to have to carry around for the next couple of years. You decided that the VA does not have to sample and audit the compensation payment data. Why?
Under the Payment and Integrity Act, for the thresholds that are required, compensation had met those thresholds and were not required to report to OMB or be published in our agency financial report. However, they do conduct annual risk assessments to determine if there are still any overpayments being committed or obligated within that organization.
They don't seem to be working. Is that a fair statement?
Well, they are below the thresholds that are.
What's the what's the threshold?
The thresholds are for significant payments, it's 1.5% of program outlays and $10 million of activity or $100 million. The programs must report.
$100 million seems like a pretty long stretch. Shouldn't it be like? Oh, I got it. I know. I'm just saying. If we're in this hole that we're in, it seems to be that the numbers may be skewed a bit.
So this is the guidance that is put out by OMB Circular A-123.
So I need to go after. I need to chat with OMB.
It is their guidance, sir. So we follow their guidance in terms of what we report and whether or not the programs meet the threshold.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pappas.
Thank you. Mr. Aranta, you mentioned some information about training on how to interact with OIG and fraud alerts that you send out. Could you tell me a little bit more about how long that's been in place and the effectiveness, in your view, of those communications to employees?
Good question, sir. I can't tell you about the effectiveness because this is fairly new for us.
Okay.
As of last year for both. I can tell you the last fraud alert that we sent to VA has to deal with the disability benefits questionnaires. And these are public-facing documents that veterans can take to their private physician. Their private physician can delineate what they think is wrong with the veteran. Then the veteran submits that to VBA for as medical evidence of a disability. One thing that we haven't found it. I can tell you our criminal investigators are working on certain situations that we have become aware of, and some of those situations VBA has notified us about, where there may be some bad actors out there and trying to take advantage of veterans. And these DBQs, what we're asking VA staff to look at is when they are reviewing evidence to determine if a disability exists and what the level of disability is, if they receive these DBQs, to check them for possible indicators of fraud, such as no signature, the physician being one that we have seen where the physician was a chiropractor and he was providing a heart diagnosis. Those are the types of indicators that we have asked staff, and we're making staff aware of that across the VA. Please look at these indicators and help us.
So you're generating information both from VBA in terms of what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis and also from your investigations and what they're finding.
Absolutely.
Now, how does that information stay relevant with respect to trends in overpayments? And is that part of the training that you're offering?
Yes. So how that affects the trends is if the DBQ is fraudulent and you have this chiropractor giving somebody a heart condition and providing information, this veteran could be entitled to benefits that they are not entitled to, and then there's where the overpayment begins.
Okay. And Mr. Burke, could you comment on how you think, how effective you think this has been for VA employees?
Yes, sir. Actually, I think it's been effective to this point and will continue to be effective. You know, VA has hired thousands of new employees that have no prior interaction or involvement with how to respond and interact with the Office of Inspector General. So I think the fact that we're taking the advantage of the required training, and now many more of our employees are getting that, I think it's a good start to their career to learn how to detect these, fraudulent opportunities and interact with the IG appropriately. And in the end, that will help reduce things like overpayments and underpayments.
And so does this supplement other information that you're putting out to employees internally that will help them work on best practices, find areas where there are, errors that, can be generated and help them learn from mistakes that are made?
Yes, sir. In fact, while we're sitting here today, we have all of our division-level Veteran Service Center managers in Atlanta at a training symposium, and they are learning about quality trends, findings, and we are talking about overpayments, underpayments, and things of that nature, and training opportunities. So we do take those best practices, we share those with one another, and we do work and focus on reducing errors and improving our quality.
Well, thanks for giving me some background on that. We've got to see that bear some fruit here as we move forward, and I hope you'll keep us updated on the progress there. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Mr. Self, would you care to go, or do you want Mr. Siskowine to step in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have duties on the floor soon, so I appreciate your indulgence. Just three quick questions. Can you give me any GAO recommendations that you have closed recently? Because I know you always have outstanding GAO recommendations, quite a few.
Sir, I'm more than happy to report back with any GAO closures with relevance to this topic. Happy to do that outside the hearing, sir.
I would appreciate that. And Ms. Graham, can you share with us where your predecessor, I'm following up on Mr. Crane's questions, where did your predecessor, Mr. Tapp, get assigned?
He works for Gartner.
For?
Gartner,
Thank you.
he's retired.
And Mr. Burke, you started your testimony with saying you do not illegally spend taxpayer dollars. So the issues that we're talking about here are still under the law, are legal under the law? Is that what you're telling us? That's not the way I would that's not the way I would interpret what we're talking about here.
Yes, sir. With all due respect, I don't want the term "we're not spending it illegally" to come across flippant. Well, what I mean by that is I do want to emphasize a record 4.23 million award actions at a less than 7% improper rate. I'm not saying 7% is what we're happy with. We want to drive that lower, merely articulating where it falls with reporting requirements, and to just make sure that Congress is aware that even though we're not reporting under the PIIA requirements, we're doing special focused reviews, quality assessments, risk assessments, random sampling. My point, sir, is just, please understand that we are taking this seriously.
Yeah, and my point is the law is how we spend taxpayer dollars is very clear. So I appreciate your efforts, but I'm not sure that's an totally accurate statement. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Self. Mr. Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thanks again, Mr. Chairman. Also appreciate you putting me on the side again. Thank you for that. All right. Mr. Burke, how long have you been the Deputy Secretary for Policy and Oversight?
I was appointed to this position in April of 2021.
2021, so you've been there a little bit?
Yes, sir.
A couple years?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Burke, who's accountable for ensuring that effective internal controls are in place for mitigating improper payments of compensations?
As I alluded to earlier, every VA employee is responsible for accuracy. I have program operation responsibility across VBA's business lines. So if yours is who's responsible at that
Who's
level.
ultimately responsible? Is it you?
Well, ultimately responsible in our organization is the Undersecretary for Benefits. However, most of what is being talked about today falls under my umbrella. So I'm taking responsibility and happy to work with Congress to continue dialogue on how we improve.
Oh, so you're ultimately responsible then at the VA for this?
Ultimately, the Secretary is responsible for all things.
Ultimately the Secretary, but this falls under really your jurisdiction. Okay, got you. Mr. Burke, you keep touting this under 7% mistake rate, okay? And I understand that when you look at 100% and then you subtract 7% of that, it seems like a really small number. We all get that. But what we're actually looking at, and what I think you should be looking at, is the amount of money that's being overpaid. It'd be one thing if this under 7% was costing the American people, I don't know, $1 million. Maybe you could pat yourself on the back. But when we're talking about the amount of money that we're talking about, $1 billion annually, and we already discussed, we went from under your tenure, from what I assume from what you just told me, we went from about $1 billion to over $2 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if I were you, I would maybe ease off the throttle on touting that under 7% mistake rate, because that less than 7% mistake rate is costing the American people about $1 billion annually. That is completely unsatisfactory, sir. And, if this does fall under your jurisdiction and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who was just in that chair this morning, trusts you to do this job, in my estimation, you're not doing your job. And if there's no doubt in my mind, sir, if this were the private sector, you would be fired immediately for that type of fraud, waste, and abuse. But again, here we are in the federal government, and nobody ever gets held accountable, and it's bothersome. Now, you don't strike me as the type of man that would, look at those type of numbers and think, oh, it's no big deal. But the numbers are what the numbers are. And it's pretty despicable. And it's, once again, one more reason why we're $34 trillion in debt and nobody seems to care. What do you have to say to that, sir?
Yeah, first, as far as what kind of man I am, I'm happy to talk about that outside of a hearing. In my professional capacity, I can tell you, I'm not going to take my foot off the gas touting the amazing work that our workforce does. And you've heard me say that.
You think that's amazing? One costing the American taxpayer over $1 billion annually? You think that's amazing?
We have room for improvement, certainly, and I've said that during this hearing. What I am touting is the remarkable, amazing work of our VBA employees, which I don't think anybody questions. We have improvements to make.
No, nobody in here is questioning it. That's not why we're having this hearing, and you know it.
understand.
You know we're having this hearing because of the fraud, waste, and abuse within the VA and how much it's costing the American taxpayer. Nobody's talking about the services that you all provide. I think that's very clear. We're talking about the waste and abuse to the tune of $1 billion annually because of mistakes by the VA in overpaying veterans. That's unsat. And you keep saying amazing, amazing, amazing. There seems to be a disconnect. And maybe that's why we've gone from $1 billion annually to $2 billion annually.
For the
Go
record,
ahead.
for the record, sir, when I say amazing, the next thing comes after that is our employees. I'm not saying that 7% is an amazing number. In fact, I've said during this hearing, we have improvements to make, and we are making those. We're not content with where that is. We're not happy with that amount. Simply answering why we don't report in some of the lanes, I am proud to say that we only have one business line that still meets that requirements, but we're not happy that we're reporting even on one. It's not acceptable.
How can you say improvements, though, sir, if you guys went from in fiscal year 2022, $1 billion in overpayments to in fiscal year 23, over $2 billion?
Well, again, I think part of what I'm trying to articulate, too, is that we are doing record-setting numbers of decisions that come with record-setting numbers of disbursements. Those numbers are elevating. Again, not making excuses, I'm trying to explain, but I will say we're not going to leave this hearing content with 7%. I'm merely trying to put it in context. We have work to do, and we are doing that work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Subcommittee, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for coming before the committee to testify. You know, the Office of Inspector General has identified concerning practices, very concerning practices within the Veteran Benefits Administration, particularly regarding delays in processing proposals to reduce compensation benefits. It's clear these delays not only result in inappropriate payments to veterans, but also pose challenges for VBA managers tasked with fiscal stewardship. My interest here today is in representing the several thousands of veterans in my community in southeastern Arizona. So with that, I'll open up first question, Ms. Graham. Will the VA report the amounts of improper compensation payments resulting from VA's failure to process dependent updates in va.gov and e-benefits?
Those payments and that information is typically reported on paymentAccuracy.gov is where that information would be. I'm not exactly certain that it would be on va.gov.
When would that be available?
That information is available yearly, so the last year for paymentAccuracy.gov information is out there.
From 2000? Yeah, so from 2011 to 2022, we haven't seen the entire figures on that. When will that be available?
Is that in reference to the pension information?
That's in the compensation payments from the failure to process the dependent updates.
I'll have to take that back and get an answer for you, sir.
Now, Mr. Burke, my understanding is that the VA canceled in-person disability compensation exams during the COVID-19 pandemic to reduce overpayments resulting from delayed processing of proposed reductions of compensation. Now that in-person exams have resumed, what is the VA strategy to sustain the decrease in overpayments?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. Whether it be a combination of increasing our staffing, which we've done over the past 2 years, or the improvement as discussed and kind of pointed out by the IG in our workload distribution. And so we now have better workload distribution plans to assure that workload is being prioritized. We've also increased our resources, both in the veteran service representative and our rating veteran service representative positions to handle not just a particular type of workload, but all workload relevant to veterans and beneficiaries.
Mr. Burke, on the same line of question as before, I understand that from 2011 to 2022, the VA received inaccurate income data from SSA, as we were discussing, and that, therefore, VA relied on veterans to self-report changes in income. Did the VA implement any reasonable interim policy to verify income during that decade?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the opportunity to address that, because I want to make sure that Congress understands there was not a lapse of 10 years with just taking self-reported information. We did in 2011 discover the data quality issue, but in 2013 and 2014, new procedures were implemented, both an upfront verification process that took not just Social Security information, but federal tax information from the IRS. We reviewed that at the very beginning of a claim, and also post-award audits. Meaning after a benefit was provided, we did samplings of cases to make sure that the benefit was granted properly. We also made, throughout the years until we got to turning the match back on, improvements in the system requirements, implemented special focus reviews to detect that workload, and also ensured that our employees had access to an online portal with the Social Security Administration. A very manual, cumbersome process, but we did all those things during that.
Now, on that, how do we know that the computer matching agreement with SSA is now fixed and that further hundreds of millions of dollars of pension overpayments will not be wasted and awarded anymore?
Great question. So what we did as we went through building the requirements to upgrade and strengthen the computer matching program, we also, I don't want to use the term overdid it because we can never overdo the testing, but tested and validated the accuracy of that data match. And so we have a high level of confidence that data is accurate. And then the other thing that we did is now we're going to receive that data on a quarterly basis, which will allow the actual overpayment period to shrink, lessening the overall overpayments when a situation does arise.
Thank you. I yield back, sir.
Thank you, sir. The VA, what, yes. Yeah, I'm going. The VA is a remarkable machine. You all are amazing individuals that burden a heavy weight. This is a silly problem to have. Everything that we try to do for our veteran community, losing money is absolutely just the silliest problem to have. Ms. Graham, I don't envy your path forward. Expecting great things out of you next time that you and your colleagues are sitting in front of this committee. I have no doubt you're going to do great things. Mr. Burke, we have the list that Mr. Arante and Ms. Sullivan, thank you for joining us today, that they provided for us. I can assure you, sir, next time that you're in front of this committee, I'll have that list in my hand, and I want to see that some of those have been checked off. Is that fair? The ranking member and I will be eagerly awaiting the letter. Thank you all for your service and coming here today. Ranking member.
Well, I'll be brief. Just thank you very much for your commitment here. I think we all agree that more can be done, and it can be done better and more efficiently, both in terms of stewarding taxpayer dollars and making sure that veterans are getting what they deserve. And I know that's the mission of the department. You take that role very seriously. We're grateful for it, but we do want to see some progress here over time. And we want to know where we need to be providing the right authorities and policy language to allow you to do the work that we're asking you to do. So thank you very much for that commitment, and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so orders. Hearing is adjourned.